Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos, and it recently hit me that if you were lucky enough to be an investor in a brand new musical theatre hit, you'd be laughing all the way to the bank. And that bank would probably be the Barclays of Broadway. No, do come back. The rest of the episode should be a lot more fun than that. That was admittedly a pretty terrible opening joke, but it does touch on one of the things we're going to be talking about today, which is Broadway. Broadway is still the centre of the world of musical theatre, and it's still where so many new shows start. Sometimes we're lucky enough to have them come over to the West End, and indeed to other countries and other places. But Broadway is still the centre of our universe. Those of us who love musical talk and musical theatre will all know that Broadway is where it is at, and where it's probably always been at for at least the last 120 years or so. It's just a pity that some of the things which are where they're at are not where they could be, because it is true to say that not everything that appears on Broadway ever travels beyond that particular area. Certainly there are so many shows which I would love to have seen, and would love to see in the future, which just don't come over. And we'll be touching on that in part in this episode. And to quote from a song, I would argue that with very nearly 800 episodes of Musical Talk already recorded, we are really only 3 episodes off that amazing number, we could certainly argue that what we do here on Musical Talk, although UK-based, we are the United Kingdom's independent musical theatre podcast after all, we do spend a lot of our time giving our regards to Broadway. And that's what we're going to do today, but we're doing it by talking to someone who's been on the spot very recently, because Musical Talk's own Colm, the noted composer, has recently spent nearly a week on Broadway in a holiday specifically designed to get to as many shows as possible. And if you know anything about Broadway, the chances are that means queuing by day and seeing a show by night. And in a minute or two, you'll get to hear if that's actually pretty much what happened to Colm. But of course the conversation with him about Broadway will be much more than that, because he's going to give us his insights on the shows that he saw, many of which will never come, I imagine, to Britain. So this could be one of the very few times that we get a chance to talk about some of these things. Well, that's us setting up this week's stall. I suggest we get on with it. And so I hope you'll enjoy this little roundup of what's happening on Broadway with the very excellent Colm. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Colm, absolutely wonderful to see you, as it always is.
Are you sure, Thos?
Yes, I'm pretty emphatic, actually. I've also written it down to prove it to myself. But I didn't need to, because I knew it before I came in.
It's on the script.
It is, yes. It is fun seeing you, your name here. So today we're going to be talking about what I suspect really should still be called the cradle of musical theatre. In popular conception, Broadway is where the middle of the universe of musical theatre still exists. Now, of course, that's from a Western perspective. And there is such thing as the European musical and the London musical, and lots of other places generate musicals. Of course they do. But Broadway still has a kind of shining light concept about it. The Great White Way, as they say. So my question to you is, you've just been to Broadway for a holiday.
I have.
Before we get on to any of the things you saw, I suppose I want to ask, what is the attraction for you? You went on holiday to go to Broadway. It wasn't just for New York, it was Broadway itself.
Yes.
So why?
Why? Why would I do that?
Yeah. Why would you do that? Why would you do that?
I think Broadway offers enough variety to contrast with the London theatre scene. Sure, a lot of what goes on Broadway does make it here, or vice versa, but there is enough material out there for a holiday. in which you can go and see shows that, if you're confident enough that they won't come here, that you feel like you'll probably never ever see again. I kind of find it analogous to going to the Edinburgh Fringe. A lot of the time you're seeing shows that you'll probably never see again because they have a life that exists there. And it's nice when, sure, something does come to London or somewhere else. But for me, it is almost like a school trip. Let's go and do something completely different. It does feel like a home away from home. It is very similar to London in terms of how many theatres there are. There is a Broadway, there's an off-Broadway, there's an off-Broadway as well. Yeah. But there are so many different...
Off-squared Broadway, yeah.
Absolutely. There are so many things going on that... for me, it's very hard to go on a trip to New York, which I've done several times now, and do nothing except go and see shows, just because of what's on offer.
So, here's the question then. Knowing you're going to go there, and that was early this year, wasn't it?
Yes.
So, January, February?
February.
So, did you know in advance, in detail, what you wanted to see, or were you going to go for potluck?
It was a mix of both. I had a list of... I was there for 7 or 8 days, and it was unfortunately during a bit of a cold, dark patch on Broadway. There wasn't much on, as in I think some shows were closing, some shows were gearing to open up. Yes. Yeah, so it was a dark time in that sense.
Figuratively as well as accurately.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. But I had made a plan of, on these days, here are the shows that are on. Some of them were... I didn't just go and see Broadway shows, I went to some jazz performances as well. But so I had listed, one-off performances that were on certain nights, as well as shows that were on specific days. So I had a rough idea of what I could do and all of those potential options. I probably listed about 12 to 15 shows. I wasn't going to be able to see all of them.
No.
But I had definitely thought that at least 7 or 8 shows might be possible if I was there for 7 to 8 days, and then was very much dictated by how I felt on the day and then the availability of the tickets. I didn't book anything in advance, which some people might see as a mistake. I know when you go to the Edinburgh Fringe, usually everything is booked already.
For me, yes, I catalogue my life in advance, but that's horses for courses, because not everyone likes doing that.
Well, and also I think if I were to go to the Fringe again, I probably would do something like that. Whereas with Broadway, the best way to get cheap tickets is to queue for shows, which is what we did. Of the 5 Broadway shows that we saw, 3 of which we queued for tickets, and 2 of those as well were standing tickets, and then the others were booked on the day as well. Nothing was booked in advance, as it were, except on the day.
Which gave you flexibility at one level, because presumably if a show had been completely sold out and you couldn't queue for it, or it looked like there was no point queuing for it because the queue was already enormous, you could have then moved on to another option for that day. Did you find yourself... Was there a show that you particularly wanted to see which was just not going to be available to you? What was super popular beyond your ability to see it?
Well, ironically, the hot ticket at the time was Funny Girl on Broadway, which had Lea Michele of Glee as the lead role.
The girl who was funny.
Well, yes. I think we thought we weren't going to be successful, and it was on our last night that we did queue for 4 hours to see it. And it was worth that in terms of experience. We had such lovely conversations with people who were queuing with us, and we were the first in the queue. And I don't know, this is a conversation for another time, but the questionable ethics of how tickets are released on Broadway is, as I said, questionable.
Because there's lotteries as well, aren't there? And
yeah,
things like that.
Yes, and we were very much queuing for standing tickets, which in London is a thing that I think is a bit more commonplace. Standing tickets seem to be a thing that you can purchase even a few days beforehand or before the run of a show starts, whereas standing tickets specifically for Funny Girl, maybe not necessarily the case for all the other shows that we saw, you had to wait at the box office until half an hour before the show started to see if the producers felt like they wanted to release standing tickets.
So they may not.
They may not. So there was
discretion.
Always...
That's quite...
It's a thing.
Emotionally stressful, I might argue.
Yeah, so there was this internal gamble of we arrived at the box office at 4 p.m. and the box office staff said, well, people don't usually turn up until about 6:30, and internal dilemma, what should we do? And I'm really glad that we did stick around, because at about 4:30 people were already queuing up, and then by the time the tickets were released at 7:30, 7:45, the queue
for an 8 o'clock performance.
For an 8 o'clock performance.
Gosh, that is tight, isn't it?
There was a queue of maybe 30 people, and then in the end, Thos, do you want to guess how many tickets they released?
28.
7.
Oh, you are joking. Right, okay. So you had to be at the front, essentially.
We were at the front. We were the first ones in. So,
and 7's not even not that people necessarily go in couples, but an odd number is a much odder number.
Yeah.
Can you remember the price of those approximately?
$40.
Oh, right. Okay, that's reasonable. That's what, 30, 35 quid?
Yeah, and again, another way in which I think we saved a lot of money was we didn't spend more than $40 for a ticket for any show. So again, not me being smug about it, but I do think the way to experience Broadway for cheap is to know what you want to see and then just hedge your bets when you're there.
That's very good. So a non-funny price for Fanny Bryce.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you.
You can have that for $40.
So, well, maybe let's talk about some of the shows you saw, the 5 Broadway shows you saw, because obviously you filled it out with some other things, exactly as you say, like jazz concerts, which I know you've enjoyed from other conversations. Let's work backwards then, because Funny Girl is the story of Fanny Bryce. And Fanny the Bryce was one of the great comedians in the 1930s on the sort of the vaudeville circuit. And in sort of the Z-Girl Follies, she would be one of the principal comedians, that kind of thing. And of course, she had an interesting life, which has been musicalised. And we know most of us would associate it with Barbara Streisand from the film, which of course has a sequel, Funny Woman. Yeah. Lord knows if they'd ever got further for another one, there would have been Funny Old Woman, Funny Pensioner. I have no idea.
The prequel, Funny Child.
Funny Child. Oh, I don't know. I went to school with a lot of very funny children. So it's a known commodity, and yet at the same time, it's not a known commodity. It did have a run here in London a few years ago with a fairly famous actress in the main role, someone from television, so who had sort of box office clout. And you've said that's the same here, someone from American television, from Glee. What did you know about Funny Girl? Because I'm sure you knew a lot more than most. Or was it a surprise to you?
I had seen the recent London revival, which I didn't realise this Broadway production is that same London revival.
Is it? It's the London show?
It is, although big asterisk, because I think more producers have been brought on board, and it looks completely different. It is nothing like the Meniere, which then went to the Savoy.
So it's not a simple transposition?
It's not, but it still has Sonia Friedman's name to it.
Oh, right. Okay. So it's like the chassis is the same, but they perhaps built a different bodywork.
Ship of Aegeus or whatever. Yes. So yes, I had seen that production. I have seen the film as well, and I do know the score. There is also, again, your listeners can go do their homework, but there is some slight controversy around the casting for the show. I think when the production first started, it was with an actress called Beanie Feldman, and then very soon after, Leah Michele came in. Anyway, that's that.
Oh, fine. That's just a simple statement of facts, but obviously...
That's worth doing some more research about, and why there are certain issues and why there was uproar and whatever. In terms of a production, I was a little bit disappointed. But again,
with the production or with the piece as written?
Well, there's that as well. I think
that's always my problem with it.
I don't actually think that Funny Girl is a strong show. I think it really falls short in Act 2.
Act 2 problems?
Yeah, but I mean, I think lots of musicals struggle with Act 2. And again, I'm putting a big asterisk with this because I go into a Broadway show or a West End show or indeed any show, and you expect good performances. There wasn't a bad performance.
Yeah, it's not bad.
So there isn't that. But it had problems with flow, dramaturgically, and maybe performance-wise. I think I had just been to 2 incredibly strong jazz performances 2 nights prior, so I was maybe a little bit disappointed with how the band sounded. I think there were some questionable moments of orchestration that didn't feel particularly pleasing or felt a bit weak.
Well, presumably this is the chiselling away at the inside of orchestras in Broadway and theatre in the West End over years. They're now lighter than they used to be, and you know, I've said this before, if you just listen to different recordings of something as simple as Company from, the original recording of 1970 to a more recent recording, the new recordings sound thin.
They sound really well polished, but there's
polishing no oomph to them. Yeah, well,
polishing nails.
Whereas I still think the 1970s ones have got, I love them. They've got a certain depth of sound.
Yeah.
from real instruments and enough real instruments to carry that. It's a great sadness, and it's economics. I understand that, but it weakens a theatrical performance, I think, to a degree. So you said you'd seen it in London.
Yes.
So just briefly then, what would you say the principal difference between London and New York was?
I don't remember it so well because it was a little while ago now, but I don't remember feeling these structural issues in the same way.
Interesting.
I don't know whether it was because it was the first time I was seeing it live, or whether Act 2 flowed better. I wasn't standing when I saw it all those years ago, so it's hard to know specifically. But yeah, I do think with this time around, I definitely felt Act 2 was longer.
Clunkier?
Yeah, clunkier is the right word. I just also thought that, I don't know, the set was a bit ugly as well. Everything seemed a little bit like we have taken the Menyard production and we've put it into the August Wilson Theatre on Broadway, and Leah Michelle, go see it. But yeah, I mean, I obviously still had a great time, but
it's not the show you might have ended on.
Well, no, I did. Yeah, and I did leave thinking, God, is that really how I remember Funny Girl being? Maybe the film is better than the stage show. I might have to go and rewatch the film now to be sure of that. But
it's not a show that moves me, I must say. I also, Fanny Bryce doesn't really have currency in this country. In Britain, obviously in America, she's still remembered because she's a famous American comedian in the heart of their Broadway.
Yeah.
Whereas she's probably, I think people in this country will only know Fanny Bryce through Funny Girl and probably Barbra Streisand.
Yeah.
If I said Fanny Bryce to my parents, they'd give me what used to be known as an old-fashioned look. But I don't think they know what I was talking about.
Yes.
Yes, it doesn't help also, does it, that Fanny is a name over here, but it has other meanings.
Yes.
Yes.
And we'll leave those thoughts there.
We shall. So that was the fifth and last show that you saw. So shall we work backwards?
We can. So before that, I saw...
Coming in at number 4, Pop Pickers.
Was the Broadway adaptation of the film Some Like It Hot.
So this is a new musicalisation of an existing film, which is obviously very much a modern musical theatre trend, isn't it?
Yes.
And has been for 20 years now. So.
Yes. Music and lyrics by Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman. And was really pleasantly surprised. It was probably the best show that I saw that week.
Excellent work.
The songs did stuff. They often did more than one thing at once. They were really strong in that sense, in that they fitted characters and their journeys, but there's a lot of action that goes on, so a lot of the time the songs were helping facilitate characters move from one point to another, which for a 2.5 hour show, it didn't feel like a 2.5 hour show, so I think the songs have to be credited for that.
It must, now, bearing in mind it's about a female band, isn't it? Some Like It Hot, and gentlemen dressing up as women in disguised terms. Presumably there's an opportunity for diegetic and non-diegetic songs here. Exactly as you said, there's the songs which carry the characters and plots forward, but presumably, the chanteuse gets up every now and then and sings a song in front of the band, as you would expect.
Yeah, she sure did, and I think, again, those moments did serve double duty in that the songs were either the background for something else going on, or the song was then turned into a non-diegetic song.
How very clever, so double usage.
Yeah, it was very slick in that sense, and even though the female band were miming, it was incredible miming. They did it really, really well. I mean, I was convinced by it.
So how did you know they were miming?
Purely in terms of, obviously, the band were playing, so I just,
I see, yes. Well, why are they playing then?
Yeah.
Yes, quite.
So it was great in that
Drink
sense.
to me only with my eyes.
Yeah. So there was that, and then, I think everybody knows what kind of climate we're in at the moment, and the supposed culture wars that are going on, and the issues that could be found in the original film of two men dressing up as women, and perhaps that being used for gags, was not used in the same way in this film, and it in the musical even, and it reaches a point in Act 2 which I don't think I will spoil, because people can either watch the film and then work it out for themselves, or listen to the cast recording,
of course,
or keep their fingers crossed for a London transfer, which I think is probably possible. But it's dealt with in such a character-driven way, and again, is done through song, so that the moment in which a character who has been dressing up as a woman decides, actually, no, I am going to stay a woman, is handled really, really well, I think,
Yes.
for my money.
So it's a bit more thought through, a bit more tender, a bit more relevant and contemporary.
And progressive, I'd say.
Yeah. Which is interesting because the other thing that's going on at the moment, more in America than over here, is the anti-drag thing, of course.
Yeah.
But we're not here to discuss politics, but
We're
it's
not.
interesting that there's this context.
Yeah.
That we are living in an interesting world, and that's the nicest way I can describe it. But actually, it's possible to take older material and make it work in the context of a modern sensibility. And I really like that. Also, Some Like It Hot is a tremendously great film.
I will say that's the only thing I think working against it. I think a lot of the impression I have, but also the show has been open now for 6 or 7 months. I don't, maybe wrong on that.
A while.
Is that I think people think, oh, this is just a musical adaptation of the film. I know the film is good, I won't go and see this. But it is that and so much more, and very different. And before Sweeney Todd opened, it was the largest band on Broadway. So to contrast that with Funny Girl, I think we are in a bit of a switch of Broadway. Dare I even say orchestras are now returning? I don't think they're bands anymore.
Fabulous.
I think the band was something like 23, 24 piece, and Sweeney Todd, I know, is 26 piece. So we're nearing 30, which is great.
Going back to the good old days. Well, I'd love to hear the soundscape that produces, because, it is ultimately, it works against musical theatre if you can't, if the music isn't played to best advantage. What you want is the lyrics to be excellently written and really audible, and you want the music to be all the things you want from a piece of music, but, for me, melody, catchy, audible, and nicely arranged and delivered.
And it is that.
Excellent. Well, that sounds fabulous. So you'd clearly recommend Some Like It Hot.
I certainly would.
And we'd like to see it over here, we think.
I think so, yes.
So, number 3, our midway point, the pivot of this very conversation.
Well, yeah, it definitely was a pivot point, because the third show...
Pivot on Parade. No, that's a different show.
The third show was Pictures from Home, which was a play. Was the only play that we saw that week. But it starred Nathan Lane, Zoe Wanamaker, and Danny Burstein.
Pretty good cast, I'd argue.
A great cast.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the show, for me, left a lot to be desired.
What a score, by the sound of it.
Yeah, I won't say too much about it other than it didn't work for me. It was a beautiful set, and it was in a beautiful theatre as well. It was in Studio 54.
Oh, which is famous.
Which I think what used to be a cinema of some kind. It had that huge size to it, huge expanse, and it was great to see those three working on stage together. They all worked really, really well. But the play as a concept, which I think is...
It was just a three-hander, by the way.
Yeah, which is based on a true story of a photographer's son and his elderly parents. They're in the later stages of their life, and he's at the kind of midpoint, turning point. That was kind of it. And unfortunately, I'm not sure I learnt a lot from it.
Fair enough.
Which is a shame, but...
Oh, well, having had a non-musical middle,
yes,
let us head towards number
beginning.
2. Yes, exactly. Come towards me.
Second show was a new musical called Kimberly Akimbo, with music, just music, or maybe music and co-lyrics by Janine Tesori, and book and lyrics by David Lindsay Abaire, who previously wrote his own play, Kimberly Akimbo. So it's an adaptation of his own play into a musical.
Sorry, and his surname is Abaire?
Lindsay Abaire, Abaire.
Fine, because, this is just the way my mind works. There's a song called Everybody's Doing It by Irving Berlin, which goes back all the way to about something like 1914.
Okay.
And one of the lyrics is, look, it's a bear, it's a bear, it's a bear.
It's Lindsay Abaire.
Yes. It's good to see that Irving Berlin was resonating 100 years later, yes.
Yeah, it was a perfectly pleasant musical. The general conceit is Kimberly is a 16-year-old girl, but she has aged considerably. So for dramatic purposes, she is performed by a woman who's in her late 50s, early 60s.
Oh, right. Hey.
So she was performed by Victoria Clark, who is a seasoned Broadway performer. And she's great, and I have always wanted to see her perform live.
It's an interesting conceit, isn't it?
It is, and I love the idea of the conceit, but I think that it fell short in that I think I'm pretty good. I think I'm as good as most people at suspending my disbelief, but I think there is only so much you can do if you've got a really, really good Broadway performer having to then act 16 it's almost infantilizing in a sense. And I don't think she was used to the best of her ability. She is an incredible singer. She has an incredible range. People will know her from playing Margaret in Light in the Piazza, in which she just sings these incredible operatic lines.
Aria, really.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's been in The Grapes of Wrath, which was an opera version of the Steinbeck.
You're taking the American pronunciation, well done.
What the
Grapes of Wrath, it'd be British.
Oh, I suppose it is,
yes,
yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, both pronunciations are available.
There was just a little bit of that disconnect. She's the oldest member of the cast. Everyone around her are teens her age.
So the peer group of the character.
Yes, and her parents as well. But having said all of that, it's a cute show. It's neat, and it takes a wholesome turn in that, it doesn't take much to do the math, using another American term, that if she is aged considerably, then you know that she has a limited time frame to her life. And indeed, that's the premise of the show, is that she's not got long left. And it's about her living life to the fullest. She doesn't have very supportive parents in that sense. So it's uplifting on the whole. I think the songs could have done more to explore character and drive the narrative rather than to just express the state of being, which is what a lot of the songs did.
Which is quite old-fashioned in a way. But then again, I suppose it was exploring the state of being, so it's justifiable in that sense. But
yes.
Because it doesn't sound like it's what I would call a dynamic narrative in the sense, and you can tell me I'm wrong. It is an exploration of an individual and their context.
Yeah.
Rather than, and then they went to Paris in a train they built themselves or something.
Yes. But otherwise, it was enjoyable. It was pleasant. I was in the third row of the orchestra, as they call it there, another American term.
And what does that mean?
The stalls.
So what they called the stalls because they're close to the orchestra, I guess.
Yes, because the orchestra are in the pit. I mean, they weren't in this show; they were on a raised level, but
there was a pit, or there is a potential for a pit.
There is a potential pit.
So is the term stalls not available then?
No, they don't use that. It's orchestra. Then I think mezzanine, and then balcony. In most Broadway houses, there are, again, another American term. In Broadway houses, there are usually only two levels. It will be orchestra and then mezzanine.
Which would be, for us, stalls and circle.
Yes.
And then balcony and gods.
Yes, and then nosebleeds.
Yes, that's right. Summit. You see, that's very interesting, because I like those little bits and pieces. I simply didn't know that. I've reached my exalted old age of where I am now, and I didn't know that at all. No. I remember, it's a slightly different story, but not unconnected, in the sense I remember a British composer friend of mine having a conversation with an American composer, and he reported it back to me, that the person considered the use of crotchets, minims and breves as antiquated and quaint.
I completely agree.
Oh, well, I was going to say, whereas my British friend said, we've never known anything different, that is the term. What do you use? And then it was explained that what is the American term? Is it a one note?
It's all based on subdivisions of the bar which contains the music. So a semi-breve is to a whole note, a minim is to a half note, a crotchet is to a quarter note, and then it divides down accordingly. And it works.
And it's called that. It's called a quarter note,
rather than a half note, whole note, and it works perfectly because it matches with other really confusing factors like time signatures, and
and the fact it's all in Italian.
Well, yeah, but if you're working in this is a tangent that is worth talking about because it's really important.
I can see I've got you by accident into an area you want to talk about. Come on.
If you are in a rhythmical meter of 4/4, so 4 beats in a bar, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can convey that by writing 4/4. And if you think about it as fractions, another way of describing that is 4 quarters.
Yeah.
4 quarters is equal to a whole. A whole note fits within 4/4 perfectly. It takes up the whole bar, hence the name. If you have a half note, a minim, half note takes up half of the bar. It's perfect. It's a perfect descriptor of how that works.
Can I say, it's a great pity we're not on video here, or because I said at the beginning I was being very emphatic, but I wasn't being nearly as emphatic.
But I've taken
you and I sitting on either sides of a sofa to record this conversation, and I must say I found myself being bounced along with your passion for this. But good, that's very interesting. Oh well, I'll let my friend know that he's wrong.
Good,
but that's once again, that was something that was invisible to me, those differences, that's separated by a common language thing.
Yes.
But the concept you've described makes sense. But obviously, presumably, the British approach is the traditional European approach, historic one. Or is that not the case either?
The British approach is the British approach, as far as
this is
I'm aware.
so often the way, I suppose.
Have these ridiculous names that don't mean anything.
Do we know what they would use in Italy or in France? I only ask because, I generally think of music annotation as being generally an Italian thing, Italian inherited thing here.
Yeah, I don't want to... Don't quote me on this, but I
didn't... I'm glad no one's recording this then.
I didn't think that the mainland Europeans used crotchet minim. I thought they used something that was not dissimilar to
the American number basis.
Whole note, half note.
Interesting. Well, anyway, research for another day.
Yes, I will look that up.
So you were agog at Kimberley Akimbo.
I was mildly intrigued, we'll say.
And just before we leave that, how would you describe the music just in a simple term for someone like me who wasn't there? Is it folksy? Is it upbeat? What is it Tisch school? Where are we? Well, no, Tisch school lyrics always have to have a very similar kind of sense to me.
I do like Janine Tesori a lot, but I did find it middle of the road Janine. I think it was inoffensive, and it was, I don't want to say plain, because I found it really pleasant.
Yeah.
But it didn't move me in the same way that bits of Caroline or Change did. She wasn't writing in a particular style or in a particular pastiche. It felt blank canvas in that sense, and I think that might have benefited as well if it just had a bit more musical contextualizing. It was kind of poppy, it had some pop undertones, but it kind of fitted into Ersatz musical theatre, what we now think of as 21st century Ersatz musical theatre. Do we think the word ersatz is actually something we think? Is it? You mean? That's what I.
Yeah.
That's what
what you mean is we've got to that stage now where it fits a model rather than being its own thing necessarily, or is that? Unfair?
Yeah, it's music describing itself kind of music.
I know what you mean by that. Yeah, it's quite.
Which I don't want to use that as a criticism, but
no,
it's
something that's happening at the moment, and is a reasonable thing to point out. Well, which brings us, I think, on to the first show of your run,
which was Chicago.
Which is a well-known commodity.
Yeah. It was the first show we saw. It's, I think, a great way to acclimatise to going to America and to jet lag is if you arrive in the mid-afternoon, as we did, go and see a show in the evening, because it will keep you awake, hopefully, and then going to sleep straight afterwards. You'd hopefully at least remedy some of the jet lag, and for my money, Chicago is a show that you can't really go wrong with. I wanted to see it because it's the longest running revival on Broadway at the moment.
And how long has it been?
I think since 1996. So it's as old as me.
You've aged very well. So this will be the version that many of us saw in London for 10, 15 years, or parallel to that.
Yes,
presumably.
it will be that one. Which
I'm sure the British one was copied from the American. But
yes, I think that is the case, which I had seen when I was much younger, so I did want to see this, because it's become a healthy tourist trap. It's the way that the show stays open is by getting in celebrities to perform in some of the roles. So at that time they had a drag star to again bring it back to drag from RuPaul's Drag Race, Jinx Monsoon,
who's about to appear in Doctor Who.
Who is about to appear in Doctor Who? Thank you for that. I was really happy seeing her perform because she was
Mama Morton, I'm guessing.
She was Mama Morton.
Yeah. Not Mr. Cellophane.
No. And she was excellent. She really, really was. And I think for all of this kind of snobbery around star casting, they did really well in casting her in that role.
Well, also, it's just something slightly new. I mean, in a strange way, that feels like a very natural fit when it's described to me. Mama Morton's such a strange, sort of odd, grotesque almost character, but you can play that in so many different ways. And actually, you think, if it's been on Broadway since the 90s, how is it that no one's thought about doing that yet?
Yeah.
A strange way. That's good that there are still innovations to be found in what could be quite a tired show. The London one, bless it, was terribly achy by the time it staggered off the stage. I saw it towards the end of its time, and we got to the stage where when I went to see it, on a reality television singer had got the role of Mama Morton, and she could sing, but she could not act. And you need a bit of act in there as well.
You do.
And that character who should really sort of come to life was a singing character. And I don't feel I've yet seen my Mama Morton.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, the show is looking tired as well. It wasn't in good nick, but it was well worth seeing. Yes, and we stood for that as well. Started standing, ended standing.
And but you were saying you had jet lag, so presumably, that's particular.
Fine.
Yeah, thank goodness you are only in your 30s or in your 20s. I'm going to say.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
Yes. You try doing that when you're venerable. It's me and Bede. So you've described 5. Would you care to identify which was your favourite of those 5?
Some Like It Hot.
Brilliant. Right, straight in. That's very good. And were there any shows you really wished you had been able to see, which for whatever reason you couldn't make work? What are the fish that got away?
As in shows that were on, or
yeah,
shows that were soon to be on? Because there were lots of those that were about to open.
You've missed by timing.
Yes.
No, I actually meant the ones you could have seen. Is there anything you really think, gosh, I'd love to have caught? Or do you actually feel that you got the cream of what you were after?
Well, I think I saw the shows I wanted to see. There were days where, after we saw Pictures from Home, we thought, we should probably reassess and think we should pick wisely for the next show. So, and similarly, on Funny Girl Day, we had other backup options such as Hades Town, which again, I'm kind of glad we didn't see because now it is coming here.
Yes.
But yes, otherwise, not really.
Good, and but let's go back to what you were saying then. The shows are looming or were looming at the time of your visit. What do you feel that a few weeks' difference might have allowed you to see that you would have wanted to have seen?
If we were there for 1 week later, we would have been able to hopefully see Sweeney Todd. Which has...
By this promising new writer Sondheim.
Yeah. And I think it's not open yet, but the Broadway transfer of Merrily We Roll Along starring Daniel Radcliffe, which is the production from the Meunier.
As Frank or as Charlie?
Him as Charlie.
Yeah, that would work better, I think.
Is about to open, I think. And I did really want to see that. Only because to this day, I think that production of Merrily remains to be the show I've seen the most times. I think I saw it maybe 8 times. So I could have added one more tally on.
Merrily we tally on.
And there's a production of Parade on at the moment as well.
Okay.
I've not seen really a professional production of Parade and would have liked to have seen that.
Daniel Radcliffe always reminds me, at the mention of his name, that he burnished his musical credentials in How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, which is a show that repeatedly gets put on in Broadway and repeatedly fails to get here to London.
That's a very good point.
Because we had it as well in the There was an earlier version, I can't remember, 1990s or something like that, which I was desperate to come over and didn't.
Well, I feel like Guys and Dolls is here all the time.
Yes.
And How to Succeed is over there all the time. Yeah. It's like that each...
We've got our own lesser and we won't let go. Quite. Well, that's a very good point.
The lesser of two evils. Anyway.
Yes. Oh, well, I mean, I like Guys and Dolls, but I prefer... I know it's treason, but I prefer How to Succeed in Business.
I prefer Green Willow, but that's never coming, is it?
Not in our lifetimes. No, I was going to say that would make you the most happy fellow, wouldn't it? And if we're playing Frank Lesser dropping, my favourite. I found myself humming "Praise the Lord and Pass the Ammunition" the other day, which is really obscure song by from the Second World War. There's a fabulously... I don't know anything about it except it's got possibly one of the best names of any show I've ever heard of, which is, I think it's called Senior Discretion Himself.
Okay.
And you just think, great, wonder what that is.
Yeah.
So, all in all then, terribly successful trip. What's your overriding learning from your most recent trip to Broadway?
What's my learning?
What would you do different next time? Even if it's just organisational, or this is back to that earlier question actually. How far do you organise in advance, or were you actually quite happy with the process?
Well, there was one show that we did queue to see. It wasn't a Broadway show. It was a cabaret of a Broadway star. She was performing at Birdland, and I was convinced that we were going to get. Well, I had looked at tickets a week prior, and the website suggested that there were plenty. And I thought, okay, fine, I won't book. And then once we had arrived in New York, I found out that the whole event had sold out. And I thought, okay, no worries, we'll queue for returns anyway. We did end up queuing for 3 hours. Again, we were first in the queue for a small venue, and I was sure on a Monday evening that somebody would return their tickets, and nobody did. But again,
so you didn't get in?
Didn't get in. So I was disappointed to miss out on that. But Stereotypically, there are no Broadway shows on Monday. That's their day off.
Yeah.
So we had decided to pinpoint that day. So what I have learned is for smaller shows to try and probably book
in
tickets.
advance. Well, that's a really useful tip, yeah. Particularly on Broadway.
Yeah.
I appreciate the cabarets and things like that, but that's so much part of the Broadway scene as well.
Yeah.
Well, Colm, that's terribly interesting. I mean, it's a place I've never been to, and everyone says to me I ought, and maybe one day I shall.
Great.
But as
I'll
of this
see you
moment,
there.
well, we'll liaise.
On the Great White Way.
But until that happy day, I shall live vicariously through your experiences. So, seriously though, thank you for sharing your Broadway memories.
Thank you.
Musical Talk. And that was the wonderful Colm Molloy telling me about his time spent on Broadway only a few months ago. Of course, the world of theatre constantly changes, as it must, of course. And so it does mean that some of those shows will have gone and some shows will have arrived. Indeed, you heard Colm say himself that he arrived at a point of transition. When a lot of shows had just finished, theatres were dark, but new shows were coming in, which he had just missed by a week or two. So the new season is pretty much already upon us. The same is happening in London. We don't do it so much in seasons, but it's very clear that there's a wholesale change going on in the West End, and of course we'll be talking about many of the new shows there over the next few weeks and months here on Musical Talk. But it is interesting to hear what happened on Broadway. And as you will have heard in that conversation, we briefly touched on the amazing Frank Loesser, and Colm made an observation which I thought was terribly shrewd, which was, on the whole, when a Frank Loesser show is revived in London, it's going to be Guys and Dolls, and lo, we have a production of Guys and Dolls. And when a Frank Loesser show is revived on Broadway, it's as often as not How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, which, as you heard me say, is one of my favourite musicals. Well, of course, the moment we said that, something happened to make it not true, and that is that they've announced How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying in London. And it's at the Southwark Playhouse, between the 12th of May and the 17th of June. So literally over the next few weeks. And prices are £35, £28 for concessions and £16 for the previews. And here's what the Southwark Playhouse website has to say about How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. A satire of big business and all it holds sacred, it follows the rise of J. Pierpont Finch, who uses a little handbook called How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying to climb the corporate ladder from lowly window washer to high-powered executive, tackling much familiar but potent dangers as the aggressively compliant company man, the office party, backstabbing co-workers, caffeine addiction, and of course true love. This brand new production is brought to you by the team behind last year's Anyone Can Whistle and promises to be a bold and inventive new staging from modern-day audience with all the charm of the original. And it features the amazing Tracy Bennett and also Michelle Visage, who you may know from RuPaul's Drag Race. So if you want to find out more, or perhaps book tickets, go along to the Southwark Playhouse website, and that is southwarkplayhouse.co.uk. And if you want to know how to spell Southwark, Southwark. So for once in London, we have both Guys and Dolls and How to Succeed. How long will it be before we get The Most Happy Fella, or Green Willow, or even Senior Discretion himself? All of these other wonderful lesser shows. Although they are, of course, in no way lesser shows. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this week's episode. I do hope you've enjoyed this little excursion, this little week away, as it were, for us here on Musical Talk, as we've looked at what was recently on Broadway. But do join us again over the next few weeks as we talk about things which are perhaps a little closer to home here in the United Kingdom. And of course, we're only a few weeks away from our 800th episode. And we have something rather interesting lined up for that. So be sure to make time in your calendars or diaries to listen to that episode when it's broadcast in literally 2 or 3 weeks' time. Well, I better be toddling along, as they say, and I shall do that by dismissing you all, but in a way that's deemed to be polite for all parties involved, so that there are no hard feelings. There's a word that does that, and here's me leaning in to say it. Here it comes. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, presented by Thos and Colm Molloy, and edited by Thos. Copyright Musical Talk 2023. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at MusicalTalkThos.
But I do... I'll say that again. There's long do.
Do what you've done before.
Yeah, Jellicle Cats.
Seriously though, thank you for sharing your Broadway memories.
Thank you.
Name of a podcast. I'm sure.
Broadway Memories.
It feels like it ought to be, doesn't it?